Now let's talk about Gen Y. Gen Y, this is their hero. Colbert and The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. They get their news not from CBS, NBC, or ABC. They get their news from The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and from the Colbert Report, which is fine because it's actually the most accurate news there is. Generation Y, the millennials. The problem we have is that how do we get the millennials to focus on our evidence and to listen to us when they won't even talk to each other or listen to each other? These are people who sit across the table from each other and text each other instead of talking. I was giving this speech to the ABA, about 500 people in the room, and there was a young man on the front row, and I said, okay, do you have a significant other that you can reach by phone right now? He said, yes. I said, okay, would you be so kind as to call her? So he calls, and the phone ring, 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 ring. Nothing. So he hangs up. I said, okay, wait for it. Wait for it. Ding. Text message. I said, okay, don't tell me, let me guess. It says, what's up? And he said, yeah, that's what it says. I said, well, pick up the phone and call her and tell her, or I guess you'll have to text her and tell her that what's up is I want to talk to you on the telephone, which is why I called you on the telephone. They won't talk to each other. They don't listen to each other. So what in the world makes you think they're going to listen to you and me? So let's talk about how we can get the millennials to focus on our evidence. First of all, we have to achieve focus. We have to understand what motivates this generation. It's all about show and tell. Third grade school teachers could teach us so much as trial lawyers because they understand show and tell very well. But with this generation, and all generations actually, it's mostly show. So we talk about some standard focus techniques as to how you focus your message. Now the demographics of the millennials. They're born between 82 and 02. Their ages are, at the moment, are 12 to 32. They're the children of the boomers. They're the siblings of the Xers. Now, the reason they are just completely high-tech. 94% have cell phones, 76% use instant messaging, and 92% multitask and messaging. They're the second largest population. There's 75 million of them. 38% identify, self-identify as white. They're more liberal and more democratic than ever before. And 50% of these folks are entering college, so they will be the most educated generation in our history. They are different. The reason they call themselves millennials is because they graduated from high school in the year the first batch of them graduated from high school in the year 2000. So they tag themselves the millennials as opposed to Generation Y. But look at this. You're talking about a case where you've got a plaintiff who's got the inability to find a job now that he's been injured. Well, you know, it's again, welcome to our world. Their unemployment rate is 20%. They have less health insurance. They have the highest rate of obesity. They have concerns regarding their own declining health. And they feel, here's where they differ completely from Gen X. They feel that the federal government should do more for them, and all governments should do more for them. Gen X is the one that has the signs saying, keep your hands off, the federal government, keep the federal government's hands off my Medicare. They have an adverse view of business, which means that they're intelligent. They want a job with self-esteem. They're heavily burdened with school debt. and they're so heavily burdened with school debt. This is where a major part of the resentment comes against politicians and against the banks and against the corporations who bought up their notes and who now hold their school debt. A lot of these folks who graduate from college today have $150,000, $200,000 school debt that they have to deal with, and they're looking at that in the face of a 20% unemployment rate. So they're a burdened generation. They're living, which is one of the reasons why they're living with their parents longer. They have a closer relationship with their parents. They talk to an average of 1.5 times per day on a wide variety of topics with their parents. They accept authority because they're living with their parents longer, they're staying in their household, they're relying on their parents heavily. But these folks were taught to accept authority too because of the way they were raised. The millennials were raised from the time they could walk. They were put into groups. They were put into teams. All their sports are organized, and they're taught from the beginning. They have to listen to the coach. If they don't listen to the coach, they don't get to play. So they're taught to respect authority right off the bat, and they're taught rules right off the bat. They're taught games with rules. Everything is done in organizations. Everything is done in leagues right off the bat, or just from their earliest time. And so they have to learn rules. They have to accept authority. They have to. They're accustomed to being supervised because they're supervised right from the crib on up. And so for this group, things like rules of the road are even more stronger. They're even more influential than with the Generation X people. Rules of the road resonate with them because they have rules for everything. Everything they've done is by rules. When I was a kid, we wanted to play football. We'd find the kid with the football, and then we'd go over to the schoolyard and we'd start up a game with a few people, and more people would see it, and they'd come gather in, and we'd choose up sides and we'd play. And we made our own rules, and we just made up our rules as we went along. We supervised ourselves. And I remember our rules were that when I was a kid, we leave the house in the morning in the summertime when we're not in school, and the rule was we had to be back home that night when the street lights came on. And that was it. No supervision, no rules. We did everything for ourselves. But this is precisely the opposite. Precisely the opposite. This is interesting. What they say are their events. This is what they choose as their events. They think the top 10 events that influence their lives are Columbine, understandable, the war in Kosovo, the Oklahoma City bombing, the death of Princess Di, who was an icon to this group, the Clinton impeachment, the O.J. Simpson trial, which was thrown in their face on television for a whole year, the Rodney King riots, the Lewinsky scandal, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the McGuire-Sosa home run race, which I thought was kind of funny. But that's what they regard as the 10 top events on survey, the 10 top events of their life. They're self-identifiers. This is how they describe themselves. Positive attitudes, cooperative team players, which is obviously true, accepting of authority, which is true, rule followers, which is obviously true, the most supervised, which is obviously true. Again, this is self-identification. They say they're smarter. And to a large extent, they're basing this on the fact that, I don't know, maybe the fact that they have to teach their grandfather how to use a computer. They have to teach their father how to use an iPhone. Maybe they are. I mean, they're certainly smarter technologically. They're more progressive. This millennial thing bodes well for democratic politics and for progressive politics, because they are progressive. And these folks, to a very large extent, between their votes, but also their get out the vote efforts and their individual campaigning, these folks, to a very large extent, put President Obama in the White House. They regard themselves as cutting edge, and they are on technology. They teach us technology. They're better educated, 50% going to college, and they're global. They don't have the local perspective. They don't have the statewide perspective. They don't have the national perspective. They have a global perspective on life because of, obviously, the World Wide Web. Now, they're nearly polar opposites of the boomers, who are their parents. They're nearly polar opposites of the Xers, who are their siblings. And they're not, this is important for us, these folks are not as susceptible to tort reform as the Xers. For one thing, obviously they're smarter, but they're just not, they won't buy this bill of goods. They're more progressive. But also, today, these people are getting more and more educated, and more people are filling the graduate programs and the law schools, and more of their people are, it's their goal to get a law degree, or their friend's goal to get a law degree, and they know a lot of very good friends of theirs who are in law school, and they're finding out we're not such bad folks after all. The 12 key negative events in their lives. These are the cohorts that happen to this group, the millennials. 911, the dot-com failures influenced them, which gave them something of a bad attitude about business. Corporate corruption, which they've had thrown in their face their entire lives, literally. A divided country, which is getting worse by the day. The untrustworthy politicians, which is getting worse by the day. The Iraqi-Afghan wars, which they largely opposed, and that's just where they get their progressive views and their Democrat views, because the Democrats opposed, to a large extent, the Iraqi-Afghan wars. Their big event is their own lack of security. They don't feel secure because of things like the Oklahoma City bombing and all these things, and 911 that can happen to you at any time, any place, any way. They have shrinking salaries, which is a negative event. And then they see it as shrinking opportunities because so many jobs are being shipped overseas, the outsourcing of jobs being the next negative factor. And the insourcing of foreign workers. A lot of the foreign workers who are coming in are taking the jobs that they feel they should have. You have a lot of people coming in from countries like India who are taking a lot of the computer jobs at which they feel like they're particularly qualified. So insourcing of foreign workers, there are a huge number of foreign workers being insourced into the healthcare industry. And particularly since malpractice cases have been largely outlawed in a lot of states, you now have insources of foreign workers who will work in the healthcare industry much more cheaply than the American healthcare workers. And downsizing, being replaced by the computers that they love so much. So those are the key negative elements, events that they think have influenced their lives. So in terms of generic communication across the board to all these folks, it's like a newspaper article. They always taught us in journalism, you teach in your lead paragraph, you answer these questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And that's how we should prime our information in our stories. In our storytelling, you want to get their attention while they have a short attention span. If you don't grab these folks quickly, you won't grab them at all. So you take the story, the grabber in your story is who, what, when, where, why, and how, the 5 W's and how. Then you have to sequence your story And this is very important. This applies across the board. This is not just your Gen Xers now, or Gen Y. Sequencing your story is very important. How do you put you can take exactly the same elements and you put them in different order, and they have much more impact in one way than the other. For example, the priest asked the bishop, he says, a question for you, is it okay if I smoke while I pray? And the bishop said, of course not. That would be highly sacrilegious. To smoke while you pray, that's ridiculous. So then he goes and asks the cardinal, sir, is it okay if I pray while I smoke? And the cardinal says, of course, you can pray anytime. Your prayers are always welcomed by God. Exactly the same question, sequenced in a different way with different result and a different impression created by it. But we have to sequence our evidence. And sequencing with today is that we can't come in and talk about big injuries, talk about how devastated the plaintiff is, talk about physical pain, mental anguish, physical disability, and all that sort of thing, until they know why they care. They'll be sitting there thinking, subconsciously, if not consciously, they're thinking, okay, so yeah, he's injured, but so why do I care? Why? So what? So what you have to do is you have to begin by making them care, making them understand that this was caused, that there was this all started with action by the defendant, liability action by the defendant. That's why we're here today, because this defendant did this, which caused injury. Now, they'll already know about the injury from Vord iron opening, but now you have to sequence your story. And in sequencing, you have to make a conscious mind appeal, which means that you can't use just words. When you start your case, in your first part of your sequencing of your story, you have to tell things about liability that you can immediately back up, very shortly back up with hard evidence, back up with things that they can touch and see and smell and feel, back up with photographs, back up with diagrams, back up with demonstratives, back up with hard evidence, not just your words, but hard evidence that appeals and has to be processed in the conscious mind. And because we have a very short leash. If we stand up and start talking hyperbolically about injuries, or even talking hyperbolically about this evil corporation that damaged this person, without backing it up soon, without backing it up with hard evidence soon, then that word greedy trial lawyer is going to pop right into the minds of the Gen Xers, and nothing will be in the minds of the Millennials, because they're off thinking about something else. So you have to engage them early. And the way you engage them is with a conscious mind appeal. And a conscious mind appeal is hard evidence. So be prepared, sequence your story so that you're making your points, and then you're following it up immediately with hard evidence to support it. Then it's only after you have them understanding that this defendant rendered damage to this plaintiff, then you can go into what that damage is all about. So the conscious mind appeal, you keep your emotional appeal. That's not to say that there's not a proper place for an emotional appeal, but you must keep your emotional appeal in their proper place and their proper perspective. You have to sequence your damage proof after your liability proof. And it's the Zeigarnik effect. Let me tell you about the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect is applied to your damage proof. the Zeigarnik effect is this, that people will hold on to those and believe and hold on tenaciously to that which they discover for themselves, much more than they will hold on to what you tell them. So what you want to do with damage proof is sequence it and present it in such a way that you let the jury discover for themselves the nature and extent of the injury of this plaintiff. For example, you have a permanent irreversible brain injury case. Okay, I think personally you're wasting it if you stand up on voir dire examination and say this is a permanent irreversible brain injury case. Or if you stand up on opening statement and say this is a permanent irreversible brain injury case. Because that may be received as hyperbole at that point because you got nothing to support it. You start out with this is a head injury. And then as you go through and get more evidence into it, then it becomes a severe head injury. Then as you get further into it, it becomes a severe brain injury, then a severe brain injury, then a permanent brain injury. And then only after the doctor describes it as such does it become an inoperable permanent brain damage. After the doctor says that, because you want the sequence in the minds of the jurors to be, oh, this party's injured. Oh, this party's really injured. Wow, this is a devastating injury. Now, this is an injury that he's going to have to live with for the rest of his life. But you want them to discover that on their own. And when their mindset is that they discover that on their own, they'll hold on to that tenaciously, infinitely more than if you stand up on voir dire and say, this is a case involving permanent, irreversible, inoperable brain damage. Yeah, so what else is new? Lawyer talk, okay? The very important issue is, I've already mentioned it to you, but the question becomes, what are you doing for yourself? This is what the jurors are thinking because they're self-reliant. So what are you doing for yourself? The answer is you have to have your own plan of rehabilitation. It doesn't matter how badly you're injured. You have to have a plan for rehabilitation. Now here's the important point. If you have a case in which your party's injured and took you 2.5 years to get to in front of a jury on this, and in that 2.5 years, all their injuries have cleared up and they've recovered. Don't come in and claim permanent mental anguish, permanent that they still worry about that every day of their lives and they're going to worry about it for every day for the rest of their lives. That's the hyperbole that they reject, and rightfully so. Try the case you have, not the case you wish you had. If you've got a case that cleared up after 18 months, that's your case. And you tell the jury quite honestly, the good news in this case is, and you've heard the discussion of all these injuries, but the good news is this plaintiff worked so hard at rehabilitation that he managed to bring himself back to the point that he no longer suffers from any of these incapacitating injuries that were inflicted upon him by this defendant. His courage, his rehabilitation, his efforts brought him back, but he's back. So what we're talking about here in terms of evidence and proof is simply what he had for that first 18 months. And that's your case. You always have to be able to answer the question, what good purpose will be achieved by an award of damages in this case? What's this money going to be used for? And you have to be able to answer that question, and don't think about the answer to that question the night before you do closing argument. Start thinking about the answer to that question early in the game, because it's been our experience in certainly with focus groups and in debriefing juries that somebody is going to ask that question or something very similar to it in the jury room. So what good's it going to do if we give him $1 million? It's not going to make him walk again. It's not going to bring the father back. It's not going to do this. It's not going to do that. That's a standard question that can cause a lot of trouble. You need to have the answer to that question. You need to deliver the answer to that question, raise the question, and then answer it yourself as part of your closing argument. Explain how the money will make a difference in the life of the plaintiff. You do that on proving the rehabilitation expert, the proof of the spouse, the proof of others, as well as to some extent the proof through the plaintiff, depending on your individual facts. But you have to show that they can make a damages proof that will show lifetime necessity, and that this money is needed to change what's going to happen over the course of the entire life. But if you don't have a life care plan, then what will these damages make in the short term? What will they do to compensate for what's been done so far? And if you've got a compensatory case where you're just getting them to award money for what's happened so far, fine, then argue it that way. But don't try to stretch it out beyond what it really is. And don't ever use the term victim. Avoid the use of the term victim, and don't treat your client like a victim. And one of the dangers in putting a client on the stand and having them talk about their injuries and so forth is that, first of all, it can be perceived as whining if it's not done properly. But secondly, you don't want them to appear to have a sense of entitlement. I once put a young 17-year-old kid on the stand who was injured, and I just sat there and watched it while it happened, even though we'd prepared him. We watched him, and he got this sense of entitlement, that he was entitled to this. He was injured as a result of the negligence of the other party. Now, he's entitled to this money. No, you can't do that. You can't do that. It'll bite you. The theme is this plaintiff is doing the best they can with what they have left. They have to show also not that they've been doing the best they can, but that they are motivated to continue to rehabilitate on their own. Avoid compensating the victim. And the reason you never use the word victim is because the majority of men in a poll thought that the victim was the person being sued. Prove, and this is a very important point, prove that the plaintiff is both in need and worthy of the help of the jury. It used to be that we could just come in and prove that they were hurt, they were injured, and they were in need. We can't do that anymore. We can't stop there. Now we have to prove that they were hurt, they're injured, and now they're in need of help, but also that they're worthy of their help. And the way you show they're worthy of their help is to show that they're doing everything they can for themselves, and on their own they can't recover. On their own they can't get to where they need to be, and that so they need the help of the jury to get them there. I've already mentioned that personal responsibility is generically the universal theme, and that applies across all of your juries, and I think in all of your cases.